Stagflation is here. Or is it? Are we just overreacting? Chaos has arrived in the form of rapidly rising prices in just about everything from gas, homes, cars, groceries, war in Ukraine, civil unrest, and revolution around the world in places like Sri Lanka. The message is pretty confusing because we have talk of inflation potentially getting out of control, seeing future hyperinflation, but at the same time, we also have markets tanking, businesses laying off workers, people having a hard time hiring workers, talk of food shortages, mass protests, civil unrest, and the whole 9 yards. So what the heck is actually going on? And I promise you things will look a little more clear once you understand what stagflation is. So stagflation, as a basic definition, happens when you get the double whammy of economic stagnation, aka a recession, alongside high inflation. Now, normally these things don't happen at the same time. They're usually distinct phenomena. So under stagflation, you have symptoms of recession. So that means you have high unemployment, a decline in GDP or productivity, and poorly performing stocks and other markets. At the same time, you also have symptoms of high inflation. So that means prices are rising and rising and rising. Why is this combination so bad? It's bad for everybody because an increase in unemployment means it's harder for people to get the money they need to support themselves. So fewer people end up having money. And with runaway inflation, you have prices that are continually rising. So things get harder and harder for people to afford, even if they do keep their job. Your dollar is losing value as time goes on. So say 10 years ago, $2 bought you a loaf of bread. Now it might cost you $4 for that same loaf of bread because of inflation. And the net outcome of having both of these things at the same time is that basically everything gets a lot harder to afford for most people. And because of that, quality of life starts to decline. One of the best ways to figure out what to actually do in new situations is to look to the past and see, has this happened before? And it has. Stagflation was first recognized in the 1970s, and this was as a result of an oil shock. So there is precedent, this has happened before. How can we be sure this is actually happening right now and we're not just listening to conspiracy theorists, crazy people who are saying the end of the world is coming? So let's take a look at the facts ourselves to determine, are we experiencing stagflation right now? There are experts on one side arguing that we are not in stagflation yet because unemployment isn't high yet. But if we look at what's happening in the world, you can see that we're probably moving in the direction towards high unemployment because we're seeing a lot of layoffs and downsizing from big companies in response to the economic downturn. So we have Tesla, Coinbase, Shopify, lots of companies either laying off or putting in freezing hires and not hiring anybody new. And on the other hand, there are experts saying we are experiencing stagflation and that just because unemployment isn't high yet doesn't matter because unemployment is typically a lagging indicator, not a leading indicator of recession. And if you look to the typical definition of a recession, you'll see that it is 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth. And Q1 of 2022 was in the negative. At the time I'm recording this, we're still waiting on data for Q2, but there are firms out there predicting we're also going to be negative as well. This firm from Atlanta is predicting it'll be around negative 1.3% for Q2. And if we get 2 negative GDP quarters in a row, that is officially a recession. So that's one half of the stagflation recipe right there. Now, if you look at the other half of the equation, we need high inflation. And of course, yes, we are seeing that. Inflation is now at 9.1%, which is the highest it's been since the 1980s when we saw 19% inflation. It's safe to say the inflation part is definitely there. Looking at all of that, my opinion is that we are definitely experiencing stagflation now. What do you think? Do you agree or disagree? Tell me in a comment below. So how did we get into this mess in the first place? Why is this happening to us? And stagflation is generally considered to be a result of poor economic policy. It generally occurs at a time when you have an expanding money supply, at the same time you have constrained demand. And we're seeing both of those things. Supply of essential goods and services is being constrained for various reasons, from the aftermath of COVID supply chain issues, the war in Ukraine, which impacts among other things, the wheat supply and oil and energy supply. And we're also experiencing what people are considering the Great Resignation, where people are not wanting to go back to the office and work. So a lot of companies are having a hard time filling essential roles. So all of this leads to constrained supply. And as far as I can tell, none of these issues are getting solved anytime soon. The second piece of the puzzle is an expanding money supply. And you'll see that the Fed has printed 40% of the money supply in the last couple of years in response to the COVID pandemic, giving us a massively expanded money supply that there really is no precedent for. So the combination of this constrained supply and this really expanded money supply is textbook perfect recipe for stagflation. That's definitely not good. We're not in a good place. What do we do about it? What is the cure? How do we get out of this mess? The problem here is that curing this is where things get really tricky. Because inflation and recession are kind of at opposite ends of the spectrum. They have different cures. So typically the cure for recession is through money printing or quantitative easing, where the Fed is basically creating more money and injecting that into the economy to stimulate growth, to encourage people to go out there and spend their money and keep the economy rolling. The Fed usually does this through buying up government bonds and using new money to inject into the economy to pay for it. The problem is that this makes inflation much worse. And if you look at the cure for inflation, which is quantitative tightening, which is what is happening now, where the Fed is jacking up interest rates to cool down the economy. They are issuing bonds and selling those on the market. All of this makes recession worse because it encourages people to stop spending, to not borrow money, to not spend, and to stay home and cool down that economy. So honestly, at this point, there is no easy way out. The Fed is somewhere between a rock and a hard place. And both of their best choices they could make lead to bad outcomes. If they continue down their current path of hiking interest rates, of slowing down the economy, that should theoretically bring inflation down, but it could also crash everything. Because the US debt is so high, if interest rates get too high, they won't be able to pay interest on that, and things spiral out of control, and the whole economy could crash. On the other hand, if they stop tightening and go back to quantitative easing before inflation is back under control, then obviously that's a bad thing and inflation is going to run away, and we could end up seeing sustained high inflation or even hyperinflation in the future. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. What do you think the Fed is going to do? Are they going to keep continuing to hike rates to try to bring down inflation, or are they going to give in and pivot and go back to the money printer? Leave a comment below. So what can you do to prepare yourself personally to help weather the storm of some really uncertain economic times? And you can either figure out ways to save more money, or my favorite strategy is to figure out how to earn more. Because there's a limit to how much you can save, but there is really no ceiling on how much extra you could earn with the right approach. Over the last 6 months, I've personally been making an extra $4K per month because of YouTube. And you'll notice that my channel's not very big. This has been such a game changer for me, and I feel so much more prepared for living through the current economic times when I have something like this in my back pocket to help support me and my lifestyle. If you are interested in learning how I did that and how you could do that as well, check out this video where I break down my income in further detail. But I'm also thinking of putting together a short course to share with you my exact methods in how I was able to monetize so quickly with such a small channel. I actually had my first 4K month back when I only had 2,800 subscribers, so you really don't have to wait until you have hundreds of thousands or millions of subscribers to actually make something with YouTube. So if you want to learn how you can use YouTube to generate an extra income stream with a small channel, if you're just getting started, then click the link in the description below, head on over there and drop your email in the form on that page to let me know you're interested, and you'll be one of the first to know if and when this launches, if this is something you guys are interested in learning more about. But that is it for this video, guys. I just want to thank you for sticking it out. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up, hit subscribe, and share it with a friend. And if you're ready to continue on down the crypto and finance rabbit hole, make sure you check out one of these videos next. And I will see you guys next time.